The injustice began in a spectacular and painful way. My older brother David had always been the favorite of my parents. Since he was young, he was the center of attention, receiving the best gifts and the highest praise. On his 18th birthday, this preference became even more evident. My parents organized a grand surprise that seemed straight out of a movie. The event was an extravagant party, with a DJ, party lights, and a guest list that seemed endless. The atmosphere was electrifying, full of laughter and animated conversations. The anticipation hung in the air, with everyone wondering what the special gift of the night would be. The highlight of the party was when my parents revealed David's gift, a brand new Lexus. As he descended the stairs, all eyes turned to the shiny car parked in the garden, decorated with a giant red bow. The guests applauded and marveled at the luxurious gift, while I, hidden in the shadows, felt a bitter mix of envy and disappointment. Tears threatened to fall, but I held them back, trying not to spoil my brother's happiness. From that moment, I started to strive harder, hoping to achieve the same recognition. My grades at school were impeccable. I participated in all extracurricular activities possible, and I worked part-time to show that I was also deserving of similar treatment. Each achievement, each effort, was a desperate attempt to gain my parents' approval and love. However, no matter how hard I tried, it seemed my parents always had an excuse to deny me the same opportunities. I threw myself into my studies, sacrificing weekends and holidays, just to stand out and prove my worth. I participated in clubs, did volunteer work, and helped at home, hoping that one day my parents would look at me with the same pride they showed for David. When my 18th birthday finally arrived, my expectations were high. I imagined a party similar to David's, with many guests, music, and maybe a brand new car waiting for me. However, reality was a cold splash of water. My party was simple, without DJs, without special lighting, and with a modest number of guests. There were no grand surprises, just a common celebration that filled my heart with disappointment. As I watched the few friends and family members who attended, I couldn't help but feel overlooked and undervalued. The absence of a car was the final blow. While David had received a Lexus, I didn't get even a bicycle. I looked at my parents, expecting some explanation, some reason why I was left out, but all I received were vague excuses and empty promises. "We are still planning something special for you, John," they said, but their words sounded hollow and insincere. That night, the frustration and sadness were overwhelming. I felt invisible, as if my efforts and achievements meant nothing. I couldn't contain my frustration, and after the party, I decided to confront my parents. "Why did David get a Lexus and I got nothing even close?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. If you like following stories, reports, and surprising revelations seen on Reddit, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Public humiliation. David's birthday party had created a chasm between us. The difference in treatment was glaring, and although I tried to hide my feelings, the hurt and frustration were always present. However, the indignation I felt reached an unbearable point during a family dinner. The house was full, as always, for one of our traditional Sunday dinners. Cousins, uncles, and grandparents were present, creating a warm and bustling atmosphere. I was trying to stay on the sidelines, still trying to process the injustice I had suffered. But my grandmother, always attentive, noticed my withdrawn behavior. "I think there's something we need to discuss," she began, her firm voice cutting through the murmur of conversations. "I want to understand why John was treated so differently on his birthday." The ensuing silence was palpable. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, but my grandmother didn't back down. "David got a Lexus. And John? Why didn't he get anything even close to that?" The indignation in her voice was clear, and everyone in the room turned their eyes to my parents, expecting an answer. "He hasn't proven himself yet," my father said, trying to maintain composure. "David earned the gift through hard work." "Hard work? And what do you call what John has been doing? You're blind to how much he's been striving," my grandmother retorted, her voice filled with anger. She continued, her voice rising in intensity. This is blatant and unjust favoritism. How can you do this to him? The public revelation of favoritism shocked everyone present. Relatives who had been unaware of the situation began to turn against my parents, creating an atmosphere of intense tension. My Aunt Clara was the first to speak. I always knew you favored David, but this is too much. John deserves to be treated with the same respect and love. The support from my relatives began to flow, and I received calls of apologies from several family members in the following days. Sorry, John. We didn't know things were like this. You deserve much more than this, they said, trying to comfort me. Although I felt supported, the reality of my parents' favoritism was an open wound that even words of support couldn't completely heal. My grandmother's indignation didn't end there. She decided something needed to be done to correct the injustice. We're going to buy you a car, John. A decent car, which you deserve, she declared, her voice full of determination. My parents, however, did not like the idea at all. That's not necessary, Mom, my father said, visibly irritated. John will get what he deserves when he proves himself worthy of it. Worthy? He's already proven himself worthy. You're the ones who need to learn what it means to be fair and honest, my grandmother retorted, her voice cutting. The confrontation left my parents speechless, and for the first time, I saw doubt and shame in their eyes. My grandmother's decision to buy me a car was a mix of relief and guilt. While I was grateful to finally receive something that made me feel valued, I also felt guilty for having forced my grandparents to intervene. It was a complicated feeling, but the joy of knowing I would have a new car outweighed the guilt. The delivery of the used Subaru Legacy was made at a small family event. My grandparents were present, smiling with satisfaction. We hope you like it, John. We know it's not a Lexus, but it's a good car and you deserve it, my grandmother said, handing me the keys. The joy on her face was a balm for the pain I had felt for so long. However, the joy didn't last long. A few weeks later, while driving on the road, the car started making strange noises and suddenly stopped completely. Thick smoke was coming from the hood, and I realized that the previous repairs had been done inadequately. I called my parents, hoping for some sympathy and help, but was met with indifference. These things happen, John. You'll have to deal with it, they said, as if the problem was trivial. Their indifference was a painful blow, but my grandmother, upon hearing about the incident, was furious. This is unacceptable. How can you give him a car in this condition? She raged, defending me fiercely. Her anger was palpable, and she was not willing to let the situation stand. We'll fix this right now, John. Don't worry. Her intervention was a relief, but it also highlighted how much my parents were willing to treat me as inferior. It was as if they couldn't accept that I deserved something good, something that made me feel valued and loved. The injustice was becoming unbearable, and I knew something needed to change. The situation culminated in an even more intense confrontation during another family dinner. My grandmother, furious with my parents' indifference, decided to expose everything once and for all. You need to treat John with more respect and equality. He is your son as much as David, and he deserves to be treated with the same love and support. My parents tried to defend themselves, but the family's indignation was overwhelming. Everyone was on my side, and for the first time, I saw my parents really question their actions. The fight for justice was far from over, but at least now I knew I wasn't alone. How will the narrator deal with this new phase of his life and the persistent indifference of his parents? Keep reading to discover the next twists and turns of this intense and emotional story. The attempt at reparation. After the heated confrontation with my parents and my grandmother's fierce intervention, the family dynamics were tenser than ever. The following days were a mix of awkward silence and resentful glances. However, it seemed the pressure had finally reached a point where my parents felt the need to act. One Saturday afternoon, they called me for a conversation. John, we have something for you. We know things haven't been fair, so we decided to make amends, my father said, in a tone that sounded more obligatory than genuinely remorseful. They took me outside, where a used Subaru Legacy was parked. We hope you like it. my mother added, trying to smile. The Subaru was clearly old, but I couldn't deny it was a step towards the recognition I had longed for. Thank you, Mom, Dad. I appreciate the effort, I said, trying to hide the mix of relief and disappointment I felt. As my parents went back inside, I stood there, looking at the car. It was a gift, but also a constant reminder that, to my parents, I would never be as important as David. In the first weeks, I tried to be grateful. After all, a car is a car, and at least now I had a way to get around. But the initial euphoria soon turned into frustration. The car began to have problems, and I realized that the repairs done on it were of poor quality. One day, while driving to school, the engine started making strange noises. Before I could react, the car stopped completely in the middle of the road. Smoke was coming from the hood, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I got out of the car, opened the hood, and was met by a cloud of steam. Desperate, I called my parents, hoping this time they would show some sympathy. Mom, Dad, the car broke down. I'm stuck on the road, I explained, trying not to sound desperate. Their response was cold and indifferent. These things happen, John. You'll have to deal with it. Call a tow truck and get it sorted, my father said, as if the problem was trivial. Their indifference was a painful blow, and the frustration inside me grew. I felt abandoned and insignificant once again, as if my efforts and problems didn't matter to them. My grandmother, upon hearing about the incident, was furious. This is unacceptable. How can they give you a car in this condition? She raged, defending me fiercely. Don't worry, John. We'll fix this right now, she promised, her voice full of determination. She called a trusted mechanic and had the car towed. The diagnosis was disheartening. This car was repaired with cheap, second-hand parts. It needs a lot of work to be safe to drive, the mechanic explained. My grandmother decided this wasn't enough. John, you deserve something better. I'm going to talk to your parents again. The next confrontation was even more intense. You need to do things right, not just give him anything and expect him to be content, my grandmother said, her voice resonating through the living room. My parents were visibly uncomfortable, but the family's pressure was starting to have an effect. We'll sort this out, Mom. We promise, my father finally conceded. A few days later, my parents handed me an envelope. Here's some money to help with the car repairs, they said, trying to sound genuine. It was a modest amount, but at least it was something. However, the feeling of being treated as a burden continued to haunt me. But the Subaru continued to have problems, and the money provided wasn't enough to cover all the necessary repairs. One afternoon, while I was trying to fix the car with a friend's help, he looked at me and said, John, you deserve something better. This car is a ticking time bomb. It was then that my grandmother made a drastic decision. This can't go on, John. We're going to fix this once and for all, she declared, her voice full of conviction. She took me to a car dealership and, to my complete surprise, bought a brand new Toyota Corolla. You deserve this, John. You deserve to be treated with justice, she said, handing me the keys. Emotion overwhelmed me, and tears of gratitude began to roll down my face. Thank you, Grandma. I don't know how to thank you, I said, hugging her tightly. She smiled, stroking my hair. Thank me by being happy and successful, John. That's all I want. My parents, however, were not pleased. You didn't need to do that, my father said, his voice laden with disdain. The family tension increased even more, with my parents clearly annoyed by my grandparents' intervention. The family dynamics were in turmoil, and I felt like a misplaced piece in a broken puzzle. Despite the constant conflict, the presence of the Toyota Corolla gave me new hope. It was more than just a car. It was a symbol that I deserved to be valued and treated with justice. Every time I got into the car, I felt the strength and love of my grandparents propelling me forward, regardless of the difficulties. The battle for equality and recognition was far from over, but now I knew I had strong allies by my side. My grandmother was my greatest defender, and with her support, I was determined to face any challenge that came my way. How will the narrator deal with this new phase of his life and the persistent indifference of his parents? Keep reading to discover the next twists and turns of this intense and emotional story. True reparation. The presence of the Toyota Corolla in my life was a true turning point, but the battle for justice within my family was far from over. The car symbolized more than just transportation. It was a declaration that I deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. However, the tension between my parents and my grandparents increased considerably after this purchase. My parents were visibly annoyed by my grandparents' intervention. Conversations at home became cold and distant, and I could feel their discontent in every look and veiled comment. "Do you think you can solve everything by buying things?" I heard my father say during a heated argument with my grandmother. "You're spoiling John and making him think he can get everything easily." My grandmother didn't back down. "This isn't about spoiling, it's about justice. John worked hard and deserves to be treated with respect. If you can't see that, then you don't deserve to call him your son," she retorted, her voice full of indignation. Her words were like a shield, protecting me from my parents' contempt. The true reparation began to manifest in small gestures of solidarity and support from my grandparents. They made sure I had everything I needed to feel valued. "John, if you need anything, we're here for you," they always said, and their actions proved those words were true. They helped me with additional school costs, bought study materials, and even supported me emotionally during the most difficult times. One afternoon, my grandmother appeared with a large box. "This is for you, John. I know you've always wanted a new computer for your studies and hobbies," she said, smiling. I opened the box and found a state-of-the-art laptop, something I could never have dreamed of having. "I don't even know how to thank you, Grandma," I said, emotional. "Thank me by being happy and successful," she repeated, her smile full of love and pride. Despite my grandparents' unconditional support, my parents' indifference continued to haunt me. Every time I came home with good news about school or work, they just murmured distracted responses, as if my achievements didn't matter. One night, while we were having dinner in silence, I decided to try once more. "Mom, Dad, I got the best grade in the class on the last test. I'm really happy with my progress," I announced, hoping for some recognition. "That's good, John," my mother replied, not lifting her eyes from her plate. "You should work hard to maintain that," added my father, his voice devoid of emotion. The feeling of emptiness those words left was almost unbearable. I felt like I was shouting into an abyss, with no one listening. The accumulated pressure and indifference led me to a breaking point. I decided I needed to confront my parents once and for all. "Can we talk?" I asked one night, trying to stay calm. "Sure, John." "About what?" my mother replied, seeming surprised by my seriousness. "I need to understand why you treat me so differently from David. I work hard, I strive to be the best, but it seems it's never enough for you. What do I need to do to earn your respect and love?" I vented, feeling tears threatening to fall. My parents looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. "John, it's not that we don't love you. It's just that David has always been more focused, more determined. We thought he needed more support to move forward," my father said, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "That's not true. I've always tried as hard, if not harder, than David. I just want you to see that," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. My mother sighed, seeming to finally realize the depth of my suffering. "John, maybe we've been unfair. But it's hard to change old habits. Give us time," she pleaded, but her words sounded vague and lacked a real promise of change. Despite the vague promises, I knew I couldn't rely on them for my emotional well-being. I focused on my studies and the people who truly cared about me. My grandparents continued to be my pillar of strength and support. Every time I thought about giving up, they were there to lift me up. One night, while studying for my final exams, I received a message from David. "Can we talk?" it said. Surprised, I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. When I arrived, I saw David sitting, looking more nervous than ever. "John, I want to apologize," he began, his voice trembling. I know I've always been the favorite, and that's not fair to you. I didn't realize it before, but now I see how much it hurt you. I want to try to change that and be a better brother." The sincerity in his words caught me by surprise. "Thank you, David. That means a lot to me. I just want us to be a real family," I replied, feeling a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. The conversation with David was the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. He started to support me more, and together, we tried to build a bridge to overcome the years of favoritism and indifference. The family dynamic was still far from perfect, but at least now there was a light at the end of the tunnel. My grandparents, always attentive, noticed the change and decided to organize a grand celebration party for me. "You deserve to be celebrated, John. We want you to know how proud we are of you," they said as the preparations for the party began. The party was a magnificent event, with all friends and family present, a true celebration of my journey and achievements. My parents, however, remained distant, visibly defeated and humiliated by how the family had turned against them. It was a bittersweet feeling, but I knew I was on the right path to finding my independence and happiness. The battle for justice was far from over, but at least now I knew I wasn't alone and had the unconditional support of my grandparents and my brother. How will John deal with this new phase of his life and the persistent indifference of his parents? Keep reading to discover the next twists and turns of this intense and emotional story. Academic success and revelations. My dedication to my studies finally bore fruit in a grand way. I received the news that I had earned a 50% scholarship to college, something that exceeded any expectations I could have had. This achievement not only represented the reward for my effort but also a turning point in my life. When I revealed the news during a family dinner, the reaction was a mixture of emotions. My grandparents were ecstatic. "John, we are so proud of you! We knew you could do it," they said, hugging me tightly. Their words were a balm for my soul. They had always believed in me, even when my own parents didn't. My brother David also congratulated me sincerely. "Man, you deserve this. Congratulations," he said, giving me a hug. However, my parents were visibly unsettled and shocked. "You really got it?" my father asked, with an incredulity that hurt more than any open disapproval. My mother just muttered something about how it was good, but the discontent and envy were evident in her eyes. It was as if they couldn't bear the thought that I, the always underestimated son, had surpassed David in some way. During a family dinner, my grandparents decided to take the opportunity to confront my parents about their blatant favoritism. "We need to talk about how you've treated John," my grandmother began, her voice firm and determined. "It's unacceptable that he has been constantly sidelined while David received everything." "We don't know what you're talking about, Mom. We've always tried to treat both of them the same," my father replied, trying to stay calm, but it was clear he was uncomfortable. "That's not true, and you know it," my grandmother retorted, her voice loaded with emotion. "John has always worked hard, always tried to earn your love and respect, but all he received was indifference and disdain." It was then that my mother, in a moment of frustration, revealed the truth I never expected to hear. "We always wanted a girl, and when John was born, we could never fully accept it," she said, tears in her eyes. The room fell into total silence. Her words were like a stab to the heart. Everything began to make sense: the indifference, the lack of support, the blatant favoritism. I felt a mix of sadness and relief, finally understanding the root of the injustice I had endured for so many years. My grandparents were incredulous. "That is a pathetic excuse for the treatment he received," my grandfather exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table in anger. "John is a wonderful human being and deserves all the love and support you never gave him. It's shameful to hear this from you." My parents, having no more room to deny or justify, simply hung their heads in shame. "We'll try to do better from now on," my father said, but his words sounded empty and devoid of sincerity. I knew it was a promise made more to appease the others than a true commitment to change. With college approaching, I took precautions to avoid any sabotage from my parents. I kept all the important documents safe and made detailed plans for my departure. The atmosphere was tense, but I was determined to move forward. During this period, my grandparents continued to be my unwavering support. They helped me plan every step, ensuring I had everything I needed to start this new phase of my life. Surprisingly, David called me one day, apologizing for not realizing earlier what was happening. "I want to be independent too, John. I'm planning my own escape," he confessed, revealing that he was also tired of the toxic family dynamic. "I always knew something was wrong, but I never knew how to address it. Sorry for not being there for you earlier." His sincerity caught me off guard but also brought unexpected relief. "Thank you, David. That means a lot to me. I just want us to be a real family," I replied, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. It was comforting to know that, despite everything, there was still a chance to rebuild our relationship. David's decision to leave home brought a new dynamic to the family. My parents, realizing they were losing control over us, began to reflect more on their actions. The tension eased a bit, but distrust still lingered in the air. I was focused on my journey, determined to do my best in college and build an independent future. To mark my achievement, my grandparents decided to organize a grand celebration party, similar to the one David had, but with a special touch for me. "You deserve to be celebrated, John. We want you to know how proud we are of you," they said as the preparations for the party began. The event was magnificent, with all friends and family present, a true celebration of my journey and achievements. During the party, my grandparents gave a speech that moved me deeply. "John, you have always been a warrior, always fought for your place in the world, even when the people who should have supported you did not. Today, we are here to celebrate your strength, determination, and success. We are immensely proud of you and know that the future holds great things for you," my grandmother said, tears of pride in her eyes. My parents, however, remained distant, visibly defeated and humiliated by how the family had turned against them. It was a bittersweet feeling, but I knew I was on the right path to finding my independence and happiness. The battle for justice was far from over, but at least now I knew I wasn't alone and that I had the unconditional support of my grandparents and my brother. In the days following the party, I began to prepare intensely for college. My grandparents were always by my side, helping me organize everything I would need. "Remember, John, we're always here for you, no matter what," they said, reinforcing their unconditional support. Every word from them was a reminder that, even in the face of adversity, I had people who truly cared about me. When the day of departure finally arrived, my grandparents and David were there to support me. My parents showed up to say goodbye, but there was still a palpable distance between us. "Good luck, John. We hope you do well," they said, their words sounding more like a formality than a genuine wish. As I drove to college, I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. I was leaving behind a house full of complicated memories, but I was also moving towards a future full of possibilities. The road ahead was open, and I was determined to take advantage of every opportunity. Upon arriving at the campus, I was greeted by the typical bustle of the first days of college. My grandparents helped me set up everything in the dorm, ensuring I had a comfortable space to study and live. "We're very proud of you, John. We know you'll do amazing things here," they said before leaving with warm hugs. That night, as I lay in my new bed, I reflected on the journey to that point. The difficulties, the confrontations, and the small victories along the way had shaped me. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, but I also knew I was prepared to face them. The battle for justice and recognition was not yet over, but I was stronger and more determined than ever. The feeling of achievement and independence was profound and emotionally gratifying. My grandparents had taught me a valuable lesson, that it is always possible to find support and love, even in the most difficult moments. With them by my side, I knew I could achieve anything. How will the narrator handle the new challenges of college and the continued quest for recognition and justice? Keep reading to discover the next twists and turns of this intense and emotional story. Plans for the future. With college approaching, I took precautions to avoid any sabotage from my parents. I kept all important documents safe and made detailed plans for my departure. The atmosphere was tense, but I was determined to move forward. Surprisingly, David called me one day, apologizing for not realizing earlier what was happening. "I want to be independent too, John. I'm planning my own escape," he confessed, revealing that he was also tired of the toxic family dynamic. To my surprise, my grandparents organized a grand celebration party, similar to the one David had, but with a special touch for me. "We want you to know how proud we are of you," they said as the party began. My parents remained distant, visibly defeated and humiliated by how the family had turned against them. Reflection and lessons learned. Reflecting on the entire journey, I felt a deep sense of achievement and independence. I thanked my grandparents and the family members who supported me, realizing how much it meant to me. The hurt and frustration were still present, but now there was a sense of peace and resolution. My grandmother, always wise, gave me one last lesson. "John, it's always time to learn a lesson in humility. Remember to be fair and honest, and never treat anyone with less than they deserve," she said, concluding the story with a note of wisdom and emotion. This journey was intense and emotionally draining, but in the end, I learned the importance of perseverance and fighting for recognition and justice. With my family's support and the strength to move forward, I knew I was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. If you enjoyed following this story, don't forget to leave a like, and if you want to follow more stories, reports and surprising revelations seen on Reddit, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. It will be a pleasure to have you with us.